The wind howled across the open plains, carrying dust and the faint cry of wolves that prowled the edges of the forest. The moon hung low, pale and cold, over the lonely hills of Wyoming. Inside a small, weather-worn cabin, a girl named Clara sat by the fire, her hands clasped tight around a chipped mug of tea. She was only 22, but loneliness had carved her heart deeper than her years could show. Her father had died the previous winter, leaving her the cabin and a few acres of land that barely grew anything now. She had no family, no neighbors for miles, only the sound of wind, wolves, and the crackle of the fire to keep her company. That night, she almost didn't hear it. A sound, faint at first, carried by the storm, like a cry for help. Clara froze, tilting her head. It came again, clearer this time, a man's voice, desperate and weak. She stood quickly, her chair scraping the wooden floor. Without thinking twice, she grabbed her lantern, her old rifle, and stepped out into the cold. Snow was falling lightly now, dusting the dry ground. The cry came from near the ravine, half a mile away. Clara's heart hammered, but she didn't stop. She followed the sound until her lantern flickered over something moving, no, someone. A man lay on the ground, half buried in snow, his coat torn and blood darkening the white beneath him. Around him, shadows moved, wolves. 3 of them, big, gray, and hungry. Clara didn't hesitate. She lifted her rifle and fired into the air. The wolves snarled, startled, their yellow eyes flashing at her. She took aim again, this time closer. The shot echoed. One wolf yelped and disappeared into the dark, the others following with low growls. For a moment, the world went still again except for her heavy breathing. Clara dropped to her knees beside the man. His face was pale, his lips trembling from the cold. Hey, can you hear me?" she whispered. He stirred slightly, opening eyes that were the color of storm clouds. I thought they had me," he muttered, voice weak. "Not today," she said softly, tearing her shawl to press against the wound on his leg. "You're safe now." With effort, she helped him stand, his arm slung over her shoulder. He was heavy and taller than her by a head, but Clara was strong, she had to be. Step by step, she led him back to her cabin. When they finally made it inside, she laid him on the bed near the fire. His clothes were soaked and torn, his body trembling from shock. She worked quickly, cleaning his wound, heating water, and wrapping him in every blanket she had. Hours passed before he finally slept. Clara sat beside him, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. In the firelight, he looked rugged, dark hair falling over his forehead, a few days' worth of beard on his jaw. Whoever he wasn't some ordinary traveler. There was something about him that whispered of danger, of a life lived on the edge. By morning, he was awake. "You saved my life," he said quietly, looking at her. "I just did what anyone would have done," she replied. He smiled a little. Not everyone would walk into a pack of wolves for a stranger. "Maybe not," she said, avoiding his eyes, "but I don't have much else to lose." His name, she learned later, was Cole Turner, a cowboy and cattle rancher passing through to sell some horses. He'd gotten separated from his group when a storm hit, and his horse had fallen, leaving him stranded and hurt. For the next few days, Clara nursed him back to health. She cooked for him, changed his bandages, and sometimes caught him watching her from across the room. They talked about small things at first, how long she'd lived alone, how he'd been drifting from one ranch job to another. He made her laugh more than she'd laughed in a year, and slowly, that heavy emptiness in her chest began to fade. One evening, the snow stopped falling, and they sat near the fire. Cole was strong enough to walk now, leaning on a crutch she'd made for him. The light from the flames danced across his face, soft and warm. "You know," he said, "I owe you my life. You can pay me back by not getting eaten next time," she joked. He grinned. "That's fair, but still, I can't leave without thanking you proper." "Just get home safe," she said, her voice quieter now. Cole looked at her for a long moment. "You live out here all alone, Clara?" She nodded. "Been that way since Pa passed. It's easier not expecting anyone." He leaned closer. "Maybe, but it don't have to stay that way." Her breath caught, but she said nothing. He reached over, his hand brushing hers, rough and warm. "I ain't a rich man, and I sure don't have much to offer. But I know what loneliness feels like. If you'd let me, I'd like to come back. Maybe build something here with you." She smiled, half unsure if he meant it. "You don't even know me, Cole. I know you're brave," he said softly. "And I know you've got more heart than anyone I ever met." For the first time in a long while, Clara felt seen. Cole left a week later when the weather cleared, promising he'd return once his leg healed and business was done. She stood at the doorway watching him ride off, wondering if it had all been just kind words. Winter passed slowly, the snow melted, wildflowers began to bloom again, and every sunset she'd find herself staring down the road, half expecting a familiar figure on horseback. But the weeks turned into months, and still, he didn't come. Then one spring evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills, Clara heard the sound of hooves. She ran outside, her heart pounding, and there he was. Cole, riding up the same dusty path, looking cleaner, stronger, and smiling like he'd been thinking of her all along. He dismounted and took off his hat. "Told you I'd come back." Clara just laughed, tears in her eyes. "I almost stopped believing you. I had to get my affairs settled," he said, walking closer. "Sold the ranch share I had. Bought some land near here." "Near here?" she asked, surprised. He nodded. "Right next to yours, if you'll let me. Figured I'd rather build fences beside you than spend my life drifting alone." Before she could answer, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver ring, a little scuffed but shining in the evening light. "Clara," he said, his voice shaking just a bit, "you saved my life once. I'd like to spend the rest of it trying to make yours better. Will you marry me?" Clara's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. She laughed through tears, shaking her head in disbelief. "Cole Turner, are you serious?" "Never been more serious in my life," he said, grinning. She didn't make him wait. Yes, I will." He slipped the ring on her finger, and for a moment the world seemed to stop, the wind, the birds, the past. Everything stilled except the two of them standing under the pink-orange sky. That summer, they married in a small ceremony right by her cabin, with only a preacher from town and a few riders passing through as witnesses. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect. Cole built a new porch, fixed her fences, and brought laughter back into her quiet home. Sometimes, when the nights were calm and the wolves howled far in the distance, Clara would look at him by the fire, the man she once pulled from the snow, the one she never expected to see again, and she'd smile. Because life had a funny way of surprising even the loneliest hearts. And out there in the wild Wyoming plains, under the same wide sky that had watched her cry so many nights before, Clara finally found something worth living for: love, wild, unexpected, and as real as the warmth of the man beside her.